The story commences with a sudden burst of bright light, illuminating the screen. A cursor reminiscent of a computer interface hovers over what appears to be a battlefield, signaling that the unfolding events are situated within a game still. The conflict continued, and it is a fierce battle between the factions. One venerating a god named Nebula, and the other devoted to a god named Hegemonia. Each side engages in intense warfare, showcasing unique specialties and strategies. The supposed gods wield control over their respective believers, akin to players maneuvering pieces in a game of chess. However, the player's freedom surpasses that of chess, allowing them to unleash formidable actions, such as launching nuclear attacks on the battlefield. The player Nebula had approved launching several nuclear warheads to his opponent's side. But even with this player, Hegemonia wasn't phased as he had anticipated. This already launching tower-like structures, embedded with faith as a form of interceptor missile. These structures revealed themselves to be super effective, as the missiles were instantly blown up. But that was within Nebula's calculations. The enemy's missile interception system couldn't keep up with him, as a single missile remained unscathed and was heading right to the center of the enemy's imperial palace, where countless orcs were praying diligently for their god to save them. If this were reality, prayers would be meaningless. But this wasn't reality, this was Lost World. In this world, faith and prayers always produce meaningful results, just like how a spirit suddenly materialized because of the people's faith, stopping the nuclear attack from landing on their territory. However, Nebula wasn't surprised. He expected this cheap opponent to be using the current meta, the Holy Oak strategy, which Hegemonia, the second placer in the server rankings, was openly proud of. Hegemonia even mocked Nebula for his failed attempt. But Nebula couldn't blame Hegemony for coming out with such confidence, because this was an overpowered strategy all along. However, he knew how to counter such a strategy. Although orcs are an easy race to recruit, it's quite a feat to have gathered so much faith already. And against his own strategy, orcs were difficult to counter, as he had chosen the skies as his battlefield so that he could freely prepare kinetic attacks. Sun Moon respected his opponent and thought that his attempt at preparing a spirit apostle was quite good. But still, his opponent was too obvious. And thanks to the fact that Sun Moon ruled the heavens and was constantly developing his technology, he was able to create and launch into space an artificial intelligence-controlled military satellite made from ancient relics. Utilizing the endless space above his enemies' heads, he was able to place a satellite there with a secret weapon, giant metal tungsten rods, which, although they contained no explosives, weighed 10 tons each, and as they began to fall, they moved very slowly at first, but soon gravity accelerated them, to the point where they began to glow red-hot through the atmosphere. His opponent, looking at all this, was not on a joke. Surprised to such a thing, he was certainly not ready. He could only swear and curse his ingenious opponent, who first threw nuclear missiles at him and now was going to finish him off with a kinetic bombardment. From space, he gave a desperate command to his holy orc to block at least the rod that was flying straight at the temple with the Emperor inside. But Sun Moon looked at his pathetic attempts and knew that none of this would work. Even if it was just a few tungsten rods, once they entered the atmosphere, the rods would accelerate so much that the force of their impact would be comparable to a nuclear weapon, and cumulative acceleration of gravity will add up. Despite the Saint Orc's best efforts, there was nothing he could do about it, and the rods simply passed through him, like a knife through butter. Feeling no resistance, it was too late for his opponent to do anything about it, because once they reached the ground, the entire capital of his empire was destroyed, and the entire population wiped out. One of tungsten rods directly hit the imperial palace. An impact from this strike seems stronger than others, because most importantly, this rod hit the Orc Emperor, and nothing could protect him. Even the countless protective spells cast on him were not enough, and he was simply crushed and dropped his staff of power. Along with the imperial palace, the underground temple has collapsed too. And now, all the faith that his opponent had been building was shattered and gone. He was immediately surrounded by many notices that his spells were losing power and disappearing for lack of faith, and when faith fades, apostle perishes with it. Now his adversary was confused and unable to control and defend his civilization. The holy orc apostles scattered, and the enemy capital, major cities, and infrastructure began to explode like fireworks from nuclear missiles. Eventually, the enemy simply surrendered, and Nebula was once again declared the winner. After the match was over, Sun Moon even thanked his opponent for a good game. But he didn't want to admit defeat and desperately asked for one more game together for a rematch. He was confident that he could win this time. Sun Moon tiredly looked at the monitor as the request for another game appeared, one after another, but he wasn't interested and just left the match for good. Now he wondered why his opponent did not surrender immediately, but wasted so much of his time. It even seemed to him at first that his opponent had an ace up his sleeve, but in the end, he didn't have much to show for it at the end. In the end, he didn't see anything new in this match. But it didn't matter after all. By winning this match, he was able to complete an achievement that required a player to stay in the top 1 ranking for 12 months, and just when he was about to go rest, a notification suddenly came which caught his attention. At first he thought it was someone texting at such a late hour, and he was already wondering who it was. But when he clicked on the notification, an astonishing achievement greeting appeared in front of him. It turned out that he was the only player who had completed all the achievements so far. But then he wondered if this might mean that they would cut off his access to beta testing, because that would be unfair. The next message dispelled all his doubts. The beta testing period was really over, and the game was about to be open to everyone. But thanks to his achievements, he had a chance to try out the game before it was released to everyone. He was a bit surprised by this offer, but still he liked the game a lot and wanted to see what the real game would be like. So, when a notification asking him to enter the game, Sun Moon decided to try it without a doubt and clicked the yes button. Suddenly everything around him went dark, and he began to fall into the void, surrounded by streams of binary code. Sun Moon thought he had lost consciousness, but that was not the case. When his vision cleared, the night sky, which he had thought was pitch black, was not quite empty, but filled with many stars. He looked around and realized he was in the middle of some kind of space temple. But then after some thought, he realized that it looked more like a ruin. Looking around, he wondered if he was dreaming. After all, he looked exactly like his in-game avatar. Suddenly, as if reading his mind, a voice sounded from behind him, assuring him that it wasn't a dream. It turned out to be a woman wearing a hooded robe, and her face was barely visible. She announced that our protagonist had also been chosen, and called his nickname Nebula. To begin with, she decided to introduce herself. Her name was Alden. Sun Moon first asked her the logical question, how did she know his name? But more than that, he was interested in something else that caught his attention, a set of blurry shadows that stood nearby. He wondered who they were. The hooded woman replied that she was wondering if any of the players would know each other. So for there to be fair game, everyone received a mask. She went on to say that she knew everyone here was wondering what was ahead of them. So she suggested getting straight to the point. She raised her hands high in the air, pointing to a planet that looked suspiciously like Earth. Although it looked that way at first glance, Sun Moon realized it wasn't. He had simply seen this planet too many times, and now he couldn't confuse it with anything else. This was the perished world. The mysterious woman solemnly announced that here and now in the boundless of perished world, all the players present would become true gods. After all, the game they had all played before perished world was based on the real world, and all these countless matches were practice games before the one that was about to begin. This was where they would become true gods. On the platform were dozens of humanoid creatures who stood in groups without dropping a word. They were all surrounded by an impenetrable darkness that created the right atmosphere. Sun Moon couldn't hear any sound, but he could feel the vibrations with his microfibers. There were even people that stood alone. Perhaps they were just embarrassed to socialize. Perished world isn't just a world that exists in games. Reason our hero analyzing the situation he got into. This planet was just like the regular Earth. The same blue ball flying through space. Except that unlike the original, it had been abandoned by the gods because of the sad events of the past. On this planet, a once brilliant civilization flourished. The various races of creatures lived in harmony. The race of armed foxes settled. The white weasels that acted as horses. Here orcs worked alongside elves, and platypuses in laboratories for the benefit of their civilizations. All was at peace, however. Not everything was so smooth. For reasons unknown, the gods had abandoned this place, having the bodies of the dragons on this land. They felt threatened for their lives, and flew off in an unknown direction, erasing their traces behind them. The time for new gods had come. All the players gathered around the heavy granite table, where Alden stood and narrated the rules of participation. The Perished World game was created to find suitable new candidates for god roles for this planet. Only once tried out this game of boredom. Now, any player could become a god. It is essentially similar to the original Perished World game. At first, only inferior beings that have lost everything in their lives will trust the player, but if you are lucky enough to increase the number of believers, there is a huge chance to become the one and only god of this planet. The world will be only yours, and no one will dare to argue with the supreme being. God dares to do whatever his heart desires. All desires that you have ever dreamed of can be realized. This is a possibility only for the god of that world. It was a wonderful offer that beckoned with its possibilities. Enticing greedy people, Sun Moon nodded. But it was noticeable that Alden wasn't saying something. What happens if I surrender here? He asked, wanting to hear as many details as possible. However, if one surrenders now, one will simply go back to one's daily life. As a payment for the game, the person will lose all memories of this place. But what happens if one surrenders? In the middle of a challenge, there is no such clause. It was simply impossible to give up. But what happens if I'm defeated by another god? He kept on fixing the skull of the ungulate on his head. In that case, the loser would meet a divine end. The watchers will welcome such a spectacle. It will be great entertainment for them. This was the answer that Sun Wound had expected. If it was a game where the winner takes all, it made sense that the participants would have to risk their lives. And if it was a competition in the real world, like the Perish World game, then it might be necessary to risk more than just lives. Divine ending, no matter how you look at it, only meant one thing: death. They aren't squeamish about killing people. For risking their lives, extinction threatens everyone. There's only one winner. There was simply no reason for protagonists to give up. Sun Moon wanted to ask a few more questions, but Alden reached out her hand and stopped him. Well, now it was time to choose. Shifting the cardboard of cards in her hands, she asked everyone who wanted to surrender to inform the organizers right now. But for those who wished to accept the challenge, she laid the cards face up. The remaining contestants begin their journey by choosing a small area of land. This is really an event that is so similar to the game of the same name, meaning that the beginning consists of choosing a small area of favorable land to rule. Looking around, it seemed that some players started whispering. It was abundantly clear that they wanted to give up. 3 no. 5 persons immediately decided to leave the competition. They cared about their own skin apparently. The starting number of players was equal to the maximum number of participants in the game, which was 30 all individuals. This meant that the final number of people was already 27 in elementary calculation. But it would be much better if half of them were eliminated as soon as possible. Okay. You can choose first. Alden turned to the protagonist. It was an unexpected decision for him. He hadn't expected such honors. Sun Won only shrugged his shoulders. The order of selection didn't matter, because the cards were good and they had randomness in their existence. Just like in the game, however. Since Sun Woo had been offered the first chance to test his fate, it seemed like they had taken the ranking order into consideration. Choosing the first card he came across, he flipped its blue surface to the bottom. Though he knew the details of each territory presented by the game, however, he expected to have better luck. As soon as the map was turned over, a circle of runes lit up under the guy's feet, which instantly teleported him to the designated location. Once the territory and land were determined, the players had to decide on the first species and tribe that they want to rule. The planet was truly beautiful. So, was each of its together or apart? Although the third continent was the largest, it didn't have as many resources as the first, nor did it have as good a climate as the second. Instead, it was home to various races and monsters, as well as many ruins that housed special in-game abilities. Depending on how one used them, they could become an advantage or a disadvantage. The protagonist promptly scanned the territory given to him and identified all the species and tribes. The land was a peninsula located in the eastern part of the third continent. A beautiful river flowed calmly past the trees that grew in the mountainous area. Green frogs sat undisturbed in the water, and one of them watched the beautiful blue butterflies that resembled Morpheus. It did not take its eyes off the seemingly potential food, but as turned out, the frog was not interested in it. The fish that swam beneath its feet were much more appealing, diving for a perch frog. Turns out to be a frogman that successfully caught the prey with its hands, splashing water around the neighborhood. The prey was very large. Another frogman shouted. It was clear from their voices that they were pleased, for tonight's dinner was fish. Turning to the blue butterflies flying by, they concluded that such a species had not been seen in their neighborhood before. But are they important now? They weren't going to eat the nasty bugs. This butterflies wasn't simple at all. Sitting on a huge chair, Sun Woon looked around at his blue-winged friends and kept pondering about the frogmen. They lived on a small area of insects with the lowest win rate, but that only depended on how to use them. Now Sun Woon received insects under his control. Although it was backwards compatible with birds, it was very even useful in the beginning. Despite it was looking, the starting point was on the eastern continent. This meant that battles were not frequent in the beginning. The small advantages gained through early engagement and fights only meant that it would be extremely difficult to implement an aggressive strategy. In this sense, a peaceful race that eats insects was more than suitable for the beginning of the game, like those frogmen for example. But what made our protagonist laugh was the number of tribes. About 500 individuals of different species was a large group that was hard to define. As a first tribe, the perished world can have an effect on creatures equal to the level of faith they possess. Faith depends on the degree of individual beliefs, on how much they believe in God and entrust their hearts to Him, on whether they truly rely on Him. They don't have to walk down a difficult path from the beginning, however. A measly 10 points of faith and 10 believers will do nothing to help. That number is too small to leave any impact on this group of frogmen. And anyway, what can be done where are no water? Until a high level of technological development is achieved, no action can be taken. And what about the other groups of creatures? Someone asked himself, looking at another screen. A group of lizard-like creatures of different ages were walking across the hot desert. They were lizard men. They eat insects too. Their skin was blue and covered with spots of different diameters. There were about 30 of them in total, too few to be called a small tribe, and a lot of them were probably all blood relatives. They were characterized by a high survival rate. These creatures could survive here without water. Even though the number of individuals had decreased, it was even for the best. In this tribe were many sick and ill, a few weak elderly lizards, and one badly injured object that was almost crawling in the end of the pack. While dying, it's understandable. He once was an important part of this group. But perhaps he had been pushed lower in rank in the power struggle and received a punishment for this. Or this was just an accident. However, there was only advantage for Sunwound. The more this lizard feels abandoned by whole world, the harder and more tired he feels. If he wants revenge, life, and other benefits, he will believe not only in God, but also in devil. Just a small miracle. Small silver lining now could help him find a new god, true new god of this piece of land nebula. Even though this lizard seemed a fragile creature, and such newborn faith would possibly not last long, it was much better than frogs. So the sun wound's choice settled on lizard men's, especially on this last wounded one. The sun is merciless in the desert. With every kilometer they travel, it drained the last of the lizardmen's strength. All the weaker individuals weaved to the back of their small pack. Especially the injured lizardmen lagged behind. The wound healed poorly due to bad nutrition and became inflamed with every step, which was slow due to weakness. The pack was barely surviving on their wanderings. They were weakened, they already thin for their build. The creature's cheeks sunken in and ribs began to show. Not everyone could hunt, and there were only small birds and stray animals in such deserts. Hey look, there's a gazelle, shouted one of the pack in surprise. They did not believe in the reality of what was happening in front of them. Lay a wounded gazelle that was waiting for its death. Its leg was broken, so it could not run away. The crowd all rushed at the poor animal, trying to grab a tidbit. One prey, and about 30 hungry lizards. How long it had been since they'd eaten meat. Without tools, they tore the poor gazelle apart, spilling fresh blood onto the heated sand. This event was clearly not for the old and wounded, where they could not compete with the strength of healthy tribesmen. They just sat aside, trying at least rest a bit. The lizard men ate the fresh meat with great gusto, slurping loudly all around. Gazelle corpse was gone in an instant, but there were still bones to nibble. The marrow and the tubular bones was also usable. One of the lizard men wanted to try the delicacy, but it was not to be. One of the female lizard men took away the leftovers. They had had enough, and they should leave something for those who, unable to hunt. She gathered all the bones into a pile, and so kindly took them to the other hungry lizards. It isn't a good thing to be weak and hungry in desert, especially considering they'd been starving for days. It was a gift from heaven. Saliva was dripping in every direction. They gnawed on the bones and drank the liquid from them. They grabbed at them, as if this bones were the last chance to live. Only the deeply wounded lizard sat by itself, behind a rock, grudgingly gnawing on a bone. The gnats flying around. The wound made him a little uneasy, but it was bearable compared to the pain he endured. His name was Rock, and he took it for granted. Clearly those who hunted had to eat more meat. Those who could not hunt should have been grateful for even being given leftovers. After all, the group could have simply left the weak and wounded to reduce the number of hungry mouths. But they didn't do that, at least not yet. While the weak and old tended to the marrow, the healthy pack members spoke of the wounded, asking Jay all what she just did. But whether pretending or not, she really didn't know what they were talking about. She questioned what they meant. The most unceremonious lizardman gave his opinion. He didn't care if they were old or young, but that wounded lizard Rack was going to die soon. Everyone knew that very well, for his wound was festering. In fact, he should have been dead by now. No one knew what contributed to it, but he held up and kept up with everyone. Most of the lizard men survived only because Rock blocked the saber-toothed tiger and defeated it. He was the only one to face the predator when everyone else turned and ran. Thanks to him, other than his wounds, the remaining group was unharmed. If it hadn't been for him, many would have been killed or injured, and at worst the entire group could have collapsed. They were already a pack that had been kicked out of the larger tribe for their weakness and illnesses, so without Rock, it would have been hard for them to keep themselves alive. He even managed to live longer than everyone expected. Everyone knows this and appreciates it. However, still, most of lizards would die from thirst and hunger. There really wasn't enough food. That's why other lizards wanted to get rid of the dead weight as soon as possible. They had to be honest with themselves. With this kind of life, natural selection played an important role. There was no point in giving all the most nutritious food to the sick. It would just prolong their lives for another day. Night came, and the full moon illuminated all the surroundings, like a lamp in a child's room. Taking a break near a small rock, the lizard men settled down to sleep in groups. Rock alone slept by himself, holding on to a throbbing wound. His already restless sleep was disturbed by the quiet flapping of wings above his ear. A familiar morpha butterfly began circling near him, shining even brighter in the moonlight. It came closer and closer to his face, forcing him to pay attention to it. Rising a little, Rock was annoyed by its strange behavior, but despite his attempts swatted away. Butterfly did not fly away, but only fluttered over his head. It seemed to be beckoning to him, calling him to follow it to the mountain near where they had stopped, and he agreed, standing up as quietly as possible. The other lizards heard the shuffling of Rock's feet, and woke the others. Their comrade was going somewhere. They watched him. Some even thought he had finally decided to leave, taking such a heavy burden off their shoulders. The whole tribe agreed to watch him for now. What was he going to do? Climbing higher and higher up the cliff, pondered Yahello. Meanwhile, he climbed further and further up, as if mesmerized by a butterfly. It was hard for him, but he didn't give up. Was this his crazy fantasy and death agony? He was the only one who responded to the call of this strange butterfly. So, maybe it was true, but what he was seeing right in front of him was true. What if it was real? Following the butterfly farther and farther up, his surprise was unparalleled. His eyes rounded to the size of a huge plate, and his jaw hung open. Insects, a huge swarm of blue bugs that crawled all over each created an extension of the mountain. This swarm resembled a tentacle and didn't fly away. They didn't dodge as if mesmerized. They climbed around, determined to become easy food themselves. This amount of food made his thoughts clouded and his breathing hitched. He was hungry. This amount would be enough for the entire Lizardmen. Pack a notification appeared on front of Sun Moon. The pack of Lizardmen 110-1 experienced a revelation and miracle. Seeing the system messages in front of him, Sun Moon felt relieved, just as Aldine had said. The interface was the same as in the Perish World game. In the insect's small area, he could create or control insects using the faith points naturally. Creating and controlling them was different from the game. The lizard men finally recognized it as a miracle. Now Sun Moon could breathe out a sigh of relief. It was success, thank God. Whispered through his mask. The first step had been taken. The amount of bugs sent by the protagonist was enough to feed the entire pack for days to come. Then, Nebula's next step was to ensure that different swarms of beetles would steadily appear day by day near this pack. Now Rock themselves announced the miracle by addressing the butterfly, as if they knew it was the one behind everything. Indeed, individuals with high will power could take care of everything on their own. However, why would they do so at this point? Intelligent beings knew that miracles were amazing, and after they were repeated, the lizard men would attribute these miracles to some creature. They realized that such occurrences were not random, but inevitable. A beetle on the arm of one of the tribes sat quietly, crossing its legs finally. Recap's tribe recognized the god, nameless beetle god. But why a beetle and not a butterfly? Beetle god, a ridiculous name for a god. Thought Sun Woundwell. He have never started with a good name. No one god seemed to have a great name at first. Just as an intelligent creature develops civilization and technology, a god's name changes too. They might have noticed his divinity after the miracle. But it wasn't enough still. This tribe will become very important to the Nebula. If everything went according to his plan, he would be able to achieve what he wanted with the next miracle, of course. This applied especially to the wounded tribe protector, named Rock. A strange blue butterfly accompanied them day after day wherever they went. Looking into the distance where it flew, Rock began to see illusions again. Still, this time he should have followed it. Unlike the rest of the group, he was suspicious of the strange swarm of bugs that appeared out of nowhere. The whole tribe rejoiced at finding food. It was like a celebration for them every time. Rack, are you going to go after your illusion right away? Asked the lizard man to his leader. However, winter was coming soon. But the bugs kept appearing from colder directions. Not a good thing if they traveled in that direction. It wouldn't be long before they would freeze to death. Lizard men had learned how to survive the winter, but the blood of their cold-blooded ancestors still remained with them in winter. Their bodies became sluggish. Food was in short supply, and they could only travel during the day when the sun rose. As a result, many of them starved to death. And so at the very least, they needed to make their way through the wilderness to find a forest with plenty of firewood to keep warm. Under such circumstances, it would be wise to ignore the fantasy now, since that wasn't safe not only for the sick, but also for the healthy. The best option would be to reach in another direction. However, Rock didn't think they should do that. There was nothing in this empty, wild sandy field. Was there some purpose to the fantasies he saw? No one knew about that, but right now, he had no choice but to follow the butterfly. Sun Woon calmly watched the actions of his favorite. There were few believers. Since this was just the beginning, there was nothing he could do specifically. He had heard too much about faith. Aside from Rock, he was skeptical of all miracles. Nothing could be done about him yet. He had to be above level 2 to bless him. Meanwhile, Rock walked bravely with the child on the sign, leading the entire tribe behind him. If only they had more faith in their god. Following the butterfly, they climbed higher and higher up the mountain. They could have a future they could never imagine just because of their faith. As they climbed to the maximum height, they saw an indescribable landscape. The child in Rock's arms was bursting, wanting to run forward and see everything. "Listen up, everyone," shouted the lizard man to his group. The nameless bug god had led us to a sacred place. This was truly the promised land. Here and there green bush could be seen, for few plants grew in the dry desert. But as they climbed the hill, a wide spring of water came into view. Dense bush and trees surrounded the spring, from which small waterfalls and streams flowed. A crowd of gawkers opened their mouths to gaze at such beauty. This was the respite they had been dreaming of all these days. Now they wouldn't have to think about food and lodging. They had everything. The pack rejoiced inexorably at this miracle. Now they would survive. Sun Woun had been right. After all, there were more believers. Sun Woun grinned as he watched the subjects. The notifications flashed before his eyes, informing him that the divinity level had been raised to 2nd. The level of the small beetle realm had increased to 2nd at first. The level of divinity only played a role in increasing the accumulation limit of faith, and there was no need to pay attention to it right away. What was important was that the small beetle realm had increased. Even though it had only reached the 2nd level, it could now bestow blessings. Blessing beetles was now a possibility. But did anyone know what he wanted? The protagonist spoke to himself, but as if addressing Rock, offering to be his priest. Let him deliver his will to his people and blessings to help him do so. A bright light shone upon the lizard man, bestowing powers upon him. However, no one saw it, but someone felt it. Evening quickly covered the continent, so they split into groups. Some hunted well and brought plenty of food. Some set up camp and the rest did the cooking. Cooked food was much tastier than cold and raw food. So after they had eaten enough, they went to bed for the first time in a long time, not worrying about anything. Only the fireflies did not sleep. One brave beetle was not afraid to fly up to the lizard and sat on his shoulder. A quiet voice called out to Rock, waking him from his sleep. When he opened his eyes, he didn't realize where he was. He was sitting on his knees in a snow-white void. It seemed more like a dream than reality. Butterflies of different sizes were circling around him, attracting his attention. Every time they tried to land on his nose, a certain voice kept calling him over and over again. In front of him stood a lizard man in a robe, whose appearance was hard to see. He was pulling his clawed paw towards Rack. Would he be able to withstand his hand? The unknown man asked, looking up from beneath his hood. But could he be trusted? What did he want from a mere outcast? From the settlement, the hand changed its position in space. Now it was pointing at him. The weight in his hands brought the boy to his senses, leaving him bewildered before he knew it. He was holding the skull of a water buffalo. It had giant horns sticking out of its head. Its eye sockets and nasal openings were empty, and its upper jaw teeth were still firmly in place. Rock handed the water buffalo skull to the lizard man, and the latter placed the skull on his head. Before him stood the very real, nameless bug god at this. The dream became dim, and then disappeared altogether. The newest sign from the god chief woke up all the people from the morning and said that he had a dream. After the story, everyone realized what the deity wanted from them, namely to sacrifice a buffalo. To hunt the buffalo, they would have to go deep into the forest, which was too much of a risk. Jael said her objections made sense. But whoever had brought them to this sanctuary wanted an offering. No one wanted to put their tribesmen in danger. Hunting water buffalo is so dangerous that you have to risk your life. Perhaps all the hunters of the pack would have to come forward. However, who would then protect the remaining weak members of the group? Gail kept hitting the mark with her remarks. It wasn't for nothing that she used to be the chief. They couldn't put the whole pack in danger. Rock said, gripping the stone spear in his hands. He had originally intended to go alone. To most of the pack, that would only mean suicide. Many began to discourage him. You couldn't catch a water buffalo by yourself. It was impossible, however. He wasn't head over heels either. God blessed him if he wanted. He would get him even a bull or a lion. No one understood what he was saying. Some even thought he was mad. It was really incredible when Rock woke up. His wound was completely healed, and all of his shoulders were covered in black scales, like bug shells. Even Joel recognized that these were strange events, but that was no reason to go buffalo hunting on his own. Of course, that wasn't all. The real reason was different. After the blessing, not only had he healed and gained mass, he had also become many times stronger. In front of the oasis was an old palm tree that leaned sideways. Standing on one leg, he threw his spear with a perfectly straight trajectory. The weapon thundered into the dry old tree, which cracked into pieces. At the sight of such phenomenal power, the entire group erupted in cheers, while Joel remained silent. All that remained of the tree was a trunk, with many thorns sticking out of the top, which could cause a lot of burrs if touched. Picking up his spear, Recap walked back to the tribe with a nonchalant expression as if nothing had happened. They ran to meet him shouting joyfully, and asking how he managed to hide such abilities. Even if that tree was dead, it was amazing how it was destroyed in one blow. Until recently, everyone had been dying. It was Rock who had saved them from such a life. Not far from the pandemonium, a herd ran by causing the ground to shake. Everyone felt this vibration. Coming to the edge of the oasis, he beckoned everyone to look at the miracle. This herd of buffalo was running, raising a pile of dust behind them. It was not large, so hunting would not be a problem. It was an incredible coincidence. In time, the herd seemed to be slowly approaching, having smelled the scent of water on the hill. However, considering that they had never seen a herd of buffalo approach this hill, there was no doubt that the buffalo had gotten lost. As well, it was strange that a buffalo herd that always traveled around the same place was lost. There was no point in waiting any further and traveling all that way later. This could not have happened without God's providence. Grabbing his spear, Rak jumped forward without thinking, ignoring any attempts to stop him. Today, they would not be dependent on hunger. Throwing the weapon that some time ago destroyed the tree, he hit directly into the forehead of the animal, killing it instantly, lying breathless on the ground. The terrified herd roared, jumping over the body, saving their lives. The joyous tribe of Lizardmen caught up with the leader and raced to the buffalo's body. The Almighty had sent them not only bugs, but meat as well. Rak's mind raced. Taking the body back to the village, they lit a fire and sat down together to prepare for dinner. A pillar of smoke rose above the mountain, making it clear that something was going on there. In the center of the settlement, on a mountain of bones, hung the skulls of water buffalo, with red blood dripping from the bull's head. It was an altar of sacrifice. Rock is a priest sent by the god, sat on his knees, addressing the god with respect to them. It was the only act of showing respect to a being higher than themselves, and it was enough. He asked to accept their offering, no matter how small it was. The entire group around him voluntarily bowed their heads, repeating the chief's request. Although it was an unusual and sloppy ritual, in execution it didn't matter to Sun Wound. What mattered was sincerity. Thanks to it, he was able to gain so much faith that it exceeded all expectations. It was a worthy ritual for Rock. As an aspiring priest, when the protagonist thought about the time he had put into it, it no longer seemed wasted. It was worth it. Sun Wound believed in principles of wilderness, not in the god of some wild grass. That was water buffalo's food. To provide enough meat, he had to get them to leave their stable. He couldn't create a grass that didn't exist, but he could destroy one that already was. This was where the help of other insects, locusts, came in handy. They narrowed the circle of direction, leading buffaloes to their desired goal. For the smaller half of the evening, they managed to eat at this stage. It was hard to expect knowledge and skills equivalent to herding, though that would be too much to expect. They knew how to dig up the roots of plants, but didn't know that it was better to leave some and bury good seeds in a pile to crossbreed them. The population of this oasis was not numerous. The maximum limit would only be reached in a few years. In their present state, they know nothing of farming and animal husbandry. This time will be hard to survive. Knowledge and skills play an important role. It is necessary to realize certain knowledge. On your own, you can't say it outright, because it violates the law of causality. Not that there is no way, but it takes some time. In the first place, it would be wise to start with a blessing. Each time the group hunted buffalo, more and more each evening, new animal parts were added to the altar, and for the present hour, it took on a majestic appearance, under several meters in height. This morning was no different from the others, except that Joel, who was walking in the center of the settlement, noticed Rock anxiously examining the altar. It had been a long time since the first altar had been created. Not only had it changed, but so had the Lizardmen. There was nothing left of their blue scales, all of them replaced by the black scales, blessed by the bug god last night. He had a disturbing dream that kept him awake. Was it a dream or even an oracle? Not even the chieftain knew. It was ambivalent looking at the altar. The tapping of bones could be heard. It was shaking unbelievably. In the pond of blessings that had protected the tribe for many years, not even a small fish came anymore. The ground was so dry that not a single plant root could be found. Both knew that they had not gotten to that point yet. This dream was about the future. In the Howl's opinion, there was nothing to worry about because the god was taking care of them. Rock had always listened to the former chief, but this time he still went to the top of the bones. However, everything is God's will. Believers always seem to find it difficult. If one did not understand its meaning, the priest would convey the will of God. The chief was only afraid of one thing. Sitting on the altar, it was hard for him to even remember the first shabby altar they had made years ago. Only the landscape had not changed over the years, but today, gazing into the horizon, the chief saw something he did not wish for anyone. The situation was not favorable, and he asked Yahello to come to him and express her opinion. That explained why the altar was shaking so much. The group of lizards that had driven them away some time before was approaching. On a huge yellow creature, what looked like an overgrown gecko, sat the large head of the group. It was an appearance that was familiar for Rakbor. Wasn't easy to forget, for he hadn't changed much since Recap's group had been banished. From this tribe, he was over 2 meters tall and large enough that the other lizard men looked like children in comparison. But his great stature was not his only strength. The blue scales that the entire Rockrak village used to have before now had this big guy, and above all, what wasn't normal, he had managed to ride such a monster. Looking at the number of people arriving, it seemed like the entire tribe had arrived, which meant only one thing. Their hometown swamp was completely devastated and destroyed the man, and must have devoured all the swampy areas. However, no one knew this. But did the desert guest know about the sanctuary? This oasis was surrounded by high mountains and was located so that you couldn't see anything until you went up to the top. There was a chance they might pass by without knowing the area. Gale suggested to the chief, but their whispers were interrupted by a yell from a neighboring mountain. Someone was addressing the visitors. The brave lizard men from the settlement announced that this was the sanctuary of a nameless beetle god, and the blue-skinned tribe could not make a move here. Poor Jael was ready to burn with shame. Today's patrol had been led by Yur, who was under her command, but the stupid lizards, instead of protecting the settlement, had only attracted unnecessary attention. Patting the girl on the shoulder, Rakak asked her not to worry. Perhaps it was the god's will. Rakrak said as he headed down the cliff. Picking up his spear, which lay nearby, he examined its integrity. Gale followed him down, assuming that the god had deliberately created this situation. Perhaps he intended to give them a test. However, the chief had other thoughts. It might not be a test, but a mission. He believed it was a mission to accept and save those who were originally with them. But even so, that big guy was a powerful individual that possessed a giant beast. If he was a reasonable person who understood something like this, he didn't continue to banish the weak tribe members into the wilderness by such dialogue. The morph a butterfly flew in. It seemed like it was always there for him. During difficult times, is this really God's will too? It's hard to dare to think about it further. For now, the chieftain would do what he could. Rockrak understood exactly what Sun Warren meant. Rockrak's tribe and the Blueskin tribe had to unite for population growth and technological development. Looking at how the tribe was moving, it seemed that the same fate had befallen them. The land had abandoned them for a reason. They were in need of rescue. Thus there was a need for more people to learn about the glory of the nameless bug god. However, it was a bit strange for the protagonist that Rock made this decision on his own without listening to the wishes of the population. Perhaps it was due to the high willpower that the chief had, a value of 14. It meant that individuals could take their own actions, and unexpected actions could lead to trouble. For Sun Wound, did this lizard men coming out of the swamp really think it was my will? God asked himself in a way. He wasn't wrong. A leader with a high will performed his duties perfectly. If channeled, this power would be a more powerful and successful tool than simply controlling everything. If Sun Moon could only instill a strong faith in the test group, progress would come sooner. Instead of letting the player control all the individuals, our hero would be able to express his intentions more effectively, getting as close as possible to the mountain on which the armed guards stood. The brush leader asked the noisy little guys if they lived here. Apparently, he did not know that these lizard men with black scales had once belonged to one of the groups he had banished. The patrol clearly didn't like this. It seemed that due to annoyance, they were ready to pounce right now. Someone so brazen had dared to insult them and take an interest in their land. The leader of the enemy tribe did not calm down and continued to pester them with questions about what they were doing in such a wasteland. The bushes, the trees, the loot, everything on this land belonged only to the Avatar. Rakrak said, walking ahead of the help he had brought from the settlement. What kind of avatar is this? The stranger asked, looking down. Rakrak, however, did not lose his confidence and replied that this was the domain of an unnamed bug avatar for such a person that stood at the head of the blue skin. It wasn't clear what was being explained to him. However, it didn't matter whether he understood or not. The arrogant lizard ordered the settlement to leave the place, threatening that if they did his will right now, he would not attack them. He didn't know how many of them were still hidden, but he was sure they wouldn't be able to defeat his group of lizard men since ancient times. If there was a leader, he should use his brain and know how to calculate the outcome of a battle. Boar teased contrary to such beliefs. Recap still didn't want to fight anyone. He wasn't stupid, just confident in his power given by the blessing. Such an answer did not satisfy the leader of the enemy group. Most likely he originally wanted blood. Putting the spear forward, Recap addressed the strangers. The poor blue-scale lizards who had lost their homes could now go to the abode of the god. The god could then take care of the new believers. As he saw fit, such an answer made the enemy laugh. What a funny opponent he had. You don't know how to calculate your moves, the stranger said, pulling the monster's reins on himself. He thought so, but he didn't know about the god and his abilities. He seemed to be talking nonsense, blood boiling in both of them. Slamming the reins on the animal's back, the enemy leader ordered kill them all in the same spot. Manoon's eyes glittered brightly, and he lunged at Recap, pointing his spear at his enemies. Recap stood confidently ahead of his pack, ready to sacrifice his life for them. Kill them, Boar shouted, slapping the reins on Manon's back. It was an honor for the responsible chieftain to stand before his enemies, speaking face to face. He only asked himself for courage and strength. In this fight, the huge reptile broke Recap's spear with one paw, striking with its strength. For an enemy chieftain to be so irresponsible was foolish. The palisman's paw was so huge that when he wanted to crush Recap, a shadow fell over his entire body, blocking the view of the sun. There was a clash of civilizations. Two different tribes came into contact. Experience points for both tribes increased greatly. It was a difficult challenge, but it had its benefits. Unwound had been paying too much attention to one tribe. These tribes were now his first level area of Lizardman. Even new skills became available that could be used, and of course the protagonist chose them. Meanwhile, the battle continued. A quick strike swept across the place where the boy stood, causing Boar to smile satisfactorily. However, when the beast raised a paw, beneath it stood the unharmed head of the tribe, which bounced aside in a moment. Something was wrong with him. Nelson Moon was controlling him. The boy looked down at his body. Black scales, sharp claws longer than the joints of a foot, and an equally long muscle came into his field of vision. Boar had no idea how he had escaped death, but he threatened not to miss a second time, so he commanded the man and to kill him. To his own tribe, he was no longer the same Recap. His mind was ruled by his own god that looked so contemptuously at his enemy. Opening the status window, he surveyed the state of affairs. Boar was a member of the blue-skin lizard tribe and had the starting stats. Level 1 tribe warrior. Level the tribe leader had strength 24. Intelligence 15, sociology 16. The special skill was breathing. Even one Recap was enough to handle this guy. The only problem was to subdue his strong little monster Drake. At the moment, the biggest threat was just him. A level 1 man and Drake with strength 87, intelligence 6, and sociality 9. At the same time, Recap was the leader of the tribe of the same name. A level 2 warrior and leader. A level 1 priest with strength 30. Intelligence 20 for socialization 26 and will 14. The abnormal status is the origin of a third level saint with such parameters. Winning was not a difficult achievement. Rushing from his seat, he was at the very nose of the moon, in a few seconds applying the strong avatar skill. Sun Moon was confident of victory. This ability gives the user an additional characteristic called Divinity Class D. 1D is 100 times the maximum amount of energy that can only exist in nature. Simply put, Recap now has a power of 630 units. If the opponent did not possess the same amount of divinity, then fighting God would become impossible. With one hand alone, he grabbed the jaw of the beast and flipped it in midair, toppling it over onto its own master. It was a huge difference in strength. Anyone lucky enough to witness the scene would be shocked. The impact seemed to shake the very core of the planet, and some blue-skinned lizard men fell to the ground. With such force, Sun Wound could turn Manoon into a bloody mess. But that would be too much. The guest would be more likely to be frightened than enthralled. Even the tribesmen that had seen him smash the tree with a single blow were impressed. The Manoon was no longer able to fight, and pressed his owner with his weight. Recap surprised every time. Even Yahello recognized that. But watching the battle, she blocked the way for the impressed brethren that wanted to approach. The lad Boar was still alive. To him, this situation was ridiculous to the point of absurdity. He didn't understand how he had managed it, and was sure he had pulled some kind of trick. When the beast was turned over, the knife that had so fortunately fallen near him fell from his belt. Shaking off the weight that was weighing on him, he grabbed the weapon and ran awkwardly toward Recap, shouting that no one should dare to relax early. His calculations were never wrong. Not this time, however. One movement of his hand and Boar stopped, with his face red from the slap. If it is cleaned well, It will reflect light. It said it doesn't
shine
change or rot even after a long time. However, gold belonged to the soft metals and was no better than iron. Now, of course, the precious metal could be used as jewelry, but this type of art was unfamiliar to lizard men. Unlike other species, naive. What was the point then if it didn't rot? His neck snapped back, and soon his knees went under. It was too soft and heavy for metal. You couldn't even eat it at this statement. Stargazer sent the young lizard away with the excuse of catching a deer. That animal with branching horns had sweet and juicy meat. The orc showed him the stag's tracks, so he gave him the plate with the remnants and left teeth marks. Silence reigned. Rak preferred to stay behind to study. It was strange that this metal did not even one of the deer carcasses and placed it on a huge stone, which turned red in a few minutes. Everything in this world waxes. There was nothing that didn't change, but this golden plate was different. Whoever created it was definitely trying to preserve important information. What could it be? In the ranks of the blue-skinned group members, Jill disturbed the chief's peace and reported that everything was ready for bed. Rak hadn't told anyone where he was going. It was amazing that Jill always found him. That was even a good thing. The only lizard man that wore a fur coat was the chieftain. This was an absolute power. There were definitely those among the lizards who believed that there was no way for them to escape. Now who is next? Asked the victor, looking at the frightened tribe. All of them unanimously threw their weapons on the dry ground, not wanting the same fate. Kneeling on their knees, they bowed their heads and swore allegiance to the new leader. It was over now, but Rak could not look down at his hands for a few moments. The avatar had just passed, leaving a wild feeling that he had dreamed it. A satisfied sun wound sat watching the lives of his test subjects. The tribe had taken it all. Who wished to be enlightened into their faith? Everyone was fed and warmed. No one even mentioned the recent skirmish. One of the beginners wondered if they were the members of the tribe who had gone into the wilderness. It was a natural question, since the color of their scales was so different from the original. Following the bug's nameless avatar, they had not only changed in appearance, but had also become much stronger. Such a statement surprised them, and it made sense otherwise. They would have died wandering the desert. The blue bug god was a salvation for them, and his power was surprising. Not far from the others sat Jol. They were discussing very important matters. Jol was worried over the addition settlement of about 6 times there would dry up very soon at this rate. Place it was deteriorating fast. Soon they would have to leave. No one would want to go back to the desert from this beautiful place. They can't just wander the wasteland. The answer must definitely lie there. Rak turned his head to the side. He couldn't seem to give a clear answer, but he did have one thought. God would not abandon them, and at any rate had given the answer. Maybe even through their brothers who just joined to them. He seemed to want the tribe to reunite with Blue Scale tribe completely. They had been isolated for a long time, and they had larger numbers. Perhaps there would be someone among them who would come up with a wise idea. The morning began quickly, and the quiet was the first to wake up. Was tied to a tree with vines. He was not happy with this arrangement. Whenever lizard men with spears approached him, he waved his paws violently to the sides. They tried to tell him that his master there was no need to continue the battle. It was better to just surrender. But he didn't listen to them, each time trying to throw the guest away from him. Once he even succeeded. When someone approached too quickly, the beast waved its tail, throwing the tug on his back. He hadn't expected this, getting up off his back loudly. This method of taming wasn't working. The Manoon's eyes glittered as his prey came closer. However, if he continued to flounder like this, it would definitely either tear the vines or broke the tree and run away. Yor yelled at the animal, asking if he really wanted to be scolded for this. However, the hand of the unknown lizardman stopped that yelling. Rak came to visit the man, and who was shaking at the sight of him, remembering how this guy had disarmed him in one move. As the chief approached, the animal backed away until he was against a tree. The chief stuck his hand out in front of him and ordered him to eat it. Didn't look appetizing, but after sniffing it, the settlement was clearly surprised at the capabilities of their leader, who was hand-feeding the brutal beast, who now became more affectionate and asked for more food, which they did not refuse to give him. It must make sense that a god would keep him alive. He had little food that was given, but if he wants to stay with the tribe in the future, it's cute when the intelligent beast settles down, looking with big eyes at his new master. If the moon causes trouble again, let me know, ordered the chief, leaving to jail, who was sitting near a large weapon with which Boar was turning it in his hands. He marveled at the skill that made it possible to do such a thing. If it weren't for that guy's persistence, I would have made better blades, said the lizard, awarded with a huge number of scars. He's a blade artisan, but why did he say that? Asked the head of the tribe. It was simple because of the trees. In the making process, they use a lot of wood, but is the weapon made by lighting a fire? Suggested Recap, looking at the blade. But no, to make a special fuel. You have to burn wood most likely. Boar had forbidden them to burn trees. He felt that preserving the environment was better for the tribe than harder metal. And since they had to leave in a hurry, they didn't have enough time to test that. After a bit, the guy said he'd think about it and report a decision on it tomorrow. It wasn't an urgent matter, so there was no rush for now. The scarred lizard left for the settlement, but he was replaced by an older lizard. He came to them as they were looking for a guide. He was an avid traveler, as befits an old lizard. He had scales of a different color than the blue-skinned tribe, certainly different from the rock rat whose scales were black. The wanderer with his old body wandered around, looking for a place where he would be accepted. During this long and fascinating time, a lot of things happened. And the most important thing was that he managed to learn to see the way. However, how was that possible? In a place where he had never been. To find his way home, he had plenty of places that wouldn't let him starve. But he couldn't guarantee it would be the same. Other wanderers and tribes. Does that mean they are not far away? Asked the chief of the guide, who nodded affirmatively. If they are, then everything is fine. In case they are against the Recap, all you have to do is if you have that kind of will, you can pull it off. But what about the traveler? How can he prove his faith? The question was a strange one. But the elderly lizard pointed to the sky. His answer was there. It wasn't just any sky. He asked to meet at night to explain. And the night sky glittered, decorated with many stars. Looking up, the chief realized it was about the stars moved to point the same way. Although they changed their position in the sky, but it did not prevent the wanderer to think of ways to use them. If you know which paths the stars follow, you can move along the path of a person and not get confused. The old man was willing to tell Rock about the movement of the stars, if he would lead a few days with him, and then not question his loyalty. They spent half the night together, discussing the rules of using the night sky. It was amazing new knowledge. There was more than enough information, so they agreed again. Who had joined them not long ago, was scratching his head at the end, trying to say something. The chief asked what had brought him. If Manoon had caused a problem. But Yer said he just looked a little disgruntled. Ever since they started giving him his food, he had become more affectionate, which couldn't have been a good thing. Gail had scared them, though. She said that everyone needed a way to get around without starving to death. That was exactly what happened. Watching Recap tame a Manoon, suddenly thought of something. Food. If beasts like Manoon could be tamed, it's surely possible to tame something completely different, like the water buffalo that often appeared near the settlement. At some point in human history, mankind was divided into two parts. One to farming, and the other to herding livestock. The source of this information were games. He was sure that farming would be a civilization, creating an environment that could block outside attacks and stockpiling food allowed the population to grow steadily. In fact, almost all large civilizations also started with large rivers. Reason Sun wound, however. Despite all this, the tribe he chose was their strong physical fitness and high level of adaptation to the environment gave them the ability to bring living beasts into the settlement without any problems. They were more suitable for herding rather than farming. Yor and the other warriors caught and brought in a herd of water buffalo. Most of the warriors were exhausted, even with the insect blessing. But the herd of water buffalo stood in formation in addition to farming. To Sun Woon's surprise, there was lizards. That was also that would ensure everyone's success. Ironwork was one of the crafts that interested Sun Woon. In the afternoon, Recap helped the iron craftsmen. They built a brazier and put a lot of wood on it. Then they covered the outside to keep the fire from going out. When the fire was lit, the holes left for air to help the fire burn were plugged, and they waited for the wood to burn down completely. The chief could not understand why things were done this way, but decided to just trust the iron craftsman. When it came to God's will, he knew he was right, but he recognized his ignorance in other matters. The iron craftsman's skills didn't end there. He took to split wooden planks and placed them in front of the fire pit. Stacking them together, the artisan then tied a wooden stick to the center of the structure and pressed it down with the palm of his hand, allowing the wind to flow easily through the fire taking hole. The heated blades out of the mold, the blacksmith began to hammer the blanks into shape, leaving them to cool in the wind. They would finally be able to produce basic iron items. For now, they could cost less than for the Recap tribe, who had no choice but to use stone weapons. This would be quite useful. Having a traveling old lizard in the tribe was also an unexpected gain. Astronomy would be a revolutionary discovery. Of course, it was still too primitive to be called such a famous science, however. It could become much more in the distant future. Astronomers could later help with architecture or math. Sunwind hoped that Recap could make proper use of the old stargazer. When night fell, the chief met up with the stargazer again. The night sky had changed, just as the stargazer had said it would. However, Recap thought that one night could have been just a coincidence. Stargazer told him how the stars would move again, and Recap memorized it carefully. It was just as the stargazer said. The stars played the role of a guide across the sky. Now the head of the tribe had no choice but to do what he had already planned. One evening, Yahello, at the leader's command, threw more wood on the fire and gathered the whole village around the altar. It has been a long time since the god brought them to this land, said the chief, addressing the tribe. During this time, they had even met their brothers. They could have been killed, but they chose to live independently. All of them could live on this land in peace and harmony for a long time, not letting outsiders in. However, those who were kicked out could have died in the desert, but that would not have been. God desired salvation, not judgment, because it would benefit a large number of lizard men. Unfortunately, heaven on this earth couldn't last forever. Resources of Oasis already run out, so they need. At dawn, they will leave the Oasis, Rock said, and invited the stargazer. All the tribe members began to talk quietly among themselves as the curious one-armed guide with turquoise skin approached. The head stargazer had been telling him about the movements of the stars for days, digging into the words. Recap confirmed that everything he had said was pure truth. The stars will be their guide from now on. Will trust the stargazer to show them the way. So that everyone will know. Then explain to everyone where you will lead us. The guide asked respectfully. After dawn, when the morning sun rises, illuminating the altar, they will head to the right side of it. The chief is going to keep going forward 15 more to the right again across the Rattan Lake, and 3 days on empty mountain trails with valley roads after this walk. The end of their long agony awaits them. An endless forest, there are many beasts there that will provide many years of hardy This area food. Is also surrounded by tribes of such an area was a great place to live. The lizard men listened to Recap's speech in complete silence. His statement had meaning for the entire tribe. He declared that the purpose of life was not just to survive, but to live in the name of the great God. Recap let Stargazer go, to which he took his place in the crowd. Chief next beckoned over to him. He stood, the very first in the row, and raised his head sharply. When he was suddenly called out, the chief asked one question: why he had not eaten a single buffalo. But the mute question read in his eyes that he himself did not understand what was happening. What you're asked the chief, looking at him, standing majestically on the huge bones of the altar. He didn't eat anything, simply because he wasn't hungry all the time. You're justified. The whole tribe tried to catch the water buffalo, but he wouldn't eat anything. Well, it's true that everyone stood his ground and said he wasn't particularly hungry. If he was patient now, he could have some meat later when he was really hungry. That's what he was really thinking. Noted the tribesman's excellent work. Of course, you're wanted to eat the buffalo now, but refrain leaving it for the future. If it continued like this, it would be a wonderful food. As long as he wasn't starving, he was willing to do it again and again. Since you had managed to hold on, he should be compensated. Recap beckoned the artisan over. A new spear forged from metal shone against the fire. This was a planned event after all. It was obvious that the best warriors should have the best equipment. However, it seemed to the other Lizardmen warriors that there was something grandiose about what was happening. Yer accepted the weapons from the blacksmith's hands, not believing his good fortune. In addition, those who followed Yer's words, those who resisted their own desires to eat what they wanted, should also be rewarded. Since they were patient, improving their dignity, they were also rewarded with quality weapons. Many of the tribe that didn't follow their example in the past were already regretting their actions. It was amazing. Joel had been wondering since yesterday what the chief was up to. Perhaps what was happening now was what he had in one go. That one had lifted the spirits of the entire tribe. Someone thought that the unexpected event had already come to an end, but it wasn't now come forward one by one. The chief said, holding the water buffalo skull in his hands, "To all true warriors, may God's protection be with you," and put the skull on himself. Their onward journey would only be successful with the spirit of patience and expectation that they displayed. To the head of the tribe as Yer approached Rock took the skull of the water buffalo, which was at the very top of the altar, and placed it on his head. He is now a noble bone warrior. This is the will of the god. At these words, Yer seemed to choke up. Tears came to his eyes. This was how about 2 dozen bone warriors were born, received a much greater reward than just being able to satisfy their hunger. And this was indeed true. They become part of the bone warrior army. Sun Moon had seen something like this before. In the Parish World such events were not foreseen. Now they must leave this holy place. The Lizardmen tribe cheerfully welcomed the warmth of the morning dawn. The Bone Warriors weren't the only ones evolving. Bright rays of sunlight illuminated the huge altar. They would soon have to leave. It was the god's will. So they were no longer bound to this place. Let everyone create an image of the Nameless. Bug God in their head, the chief ordered his clan. He couldn't say that the upcoming journey would be easy. He hoped to move forward without fear, just as they had shown patience in wanting to eat the buffalo. So they should be patient moving forward. It will only do them good. Go forward, be patient, and move forward. The Nameless beetle god will always guide them. Rock stood on the remains of the bone altar and looked up at the sky. Sun One thought he was simply identifying the constellations, disappearing in the dawn's rays. But that turned out not to be the case. He was muttering something. The chief lied for his tribe that it was God's will, so he apologized to the god. Of course, Sun One had nothing to be upset about. Perhaps the players, who wanted to move and control all of their characters, would not be very happy for his actions. But after all, it was God himself who had a high willpower to be the high priest. Thus these results could only be welcomed. Most likely, even achieving the growth of the tribe went even better. Yer had grown in stats. Now his reliability was 7. Even Rack's special abilities saw his leadership rose to 14. Priest to level 2 and warrior to level 9. The job was excellently done and in no way disappointed the expectations of the Sun Wound. From this point on, the chief would be given a full start. The afternoon sun was heating to the point of glowing lava. It was difficult to move at this hour. The entire tribe had been traveling for some time. Rock was disturbed by a herd of buffalo. The warriors dragging them forward, and the buffaloes being dragged behind them were tired. The animals were now obediently following the plan. They were also exhausted. They simply did not have the strength to run away. Even Manoon, who had great stamina, was irritated by the sun and the accumulated fatigue, to continue the path, and lay down where he had stood a second ago. All the while he was being addressed affectionately. It used to be that if it happened in the blue skin, he would be forcibly lifted up with spears. But with Rock, he had the opportunity to indulge. Even when he could not, he must be tired. The stargazer suggested as he approached the chieftain. Recap asked the guide if there was time to get some rest. However, given everyone's fatigue, there was nothing more to be done. So he gave permission to take a break. Break, shouted the chief to the whole tribe. Even though it would be a short break, everyone was glad for it. It was unbelievably difficult to walk in this blazing sun within the group of lizard men. If they followed this mountain path that was visible in the near distance, they would reach the place that chief had spoken of. Someone was asking himself if he would gain strength if he rested. No one knew what would happen, so they assumed that they should take advantage of the opportunity. Almost no one had eaten anything. 3 days had already passed. They seemed like an eternity. But still, it was easier than it had been when they were thrown out from swamps. Few months ago, 3 days, and the whole group is already very tired. We can't just hope for another God-created miracle to happen, Rack was saying to the stargazer. The earnest conversation was interrupted by the clamor of the clustered on the hillside, and then one of the warriors ran up to Rack. A group of orcs has appeared ahead of us, he said with a worried expression. They're fearless bastards. The joyous orcs didn't number a dozen, but with smiles on their faces. They approached Rock, shouting, nothing connected them to this place in the desert. Now they, with only a few kids, were running away from the horrible place. What else could there be in the canyon more horrible than the beast? Their escape was interrupted by a tribe of lizard men who were taking a break after a hard journey. Naturally, they did not expect to meet anyone on their way. Raising a spear on his shoulder, Rock grinned and told indeed the scaleless should they be called. A fire moth that flies voluntarily. The orcs lost the ability to speak, and the tribe of lizard men from such madness only made a hand-faced expression. The guests, on the other hand, had primitive clubs in their hands, which they immediately dropped to the ground. The orcs bowed in fear to their strong opponents, constantly apologizing. There had been a misunderstanding. They explained they just wanted to get out of this canyon quickly. While the lizards listened calmly to their story, orcs graciously offered them a supply of sweet, root vegetables. The orcs were in a hurry. They left home and ran away, thinking of the tribe members who had gone into the wilderness. But why were they in such a hurry? What they feared, standing up slightly, one of the orcs pointed to them. They were running away from Rock. Looked around the hillside. It was deserted, but there didn't seem to be any problems. According to the guide's words, the canyon they were now in was supposed to be traversed in 3 days. And since they had survived everything so far, they could probably survive for a few more days. In addition, as the environment changed, edible plants began to appear here and there. Orcs explained that they lived there, though not rich. They could still make a living until a terrible monster appeared. Orcs themselves were large in size. So, what could have frightened them? It was not only Rockrak, who was interested in this question, but Sunwound as well. What kind of monster
that
was
even
this
the god
land?
didn't think of it.
A huge concrete fortress, and many of the same oblong parts covered the body of the giant. This abomination is deadly.
The
Even
plot
was
of
that
the
the
Perish
old
World
avatars had left the planet. However, only the gods had disappeared, and the numerous creatures that served them remained. Among them was the abomination. Simply put, it was like a giant boss monster that would appear in the field, and whoever took the risk and hunted it would be rewarded accordingly. Ray Creek assigned a small group of warriors to guard the rest of the tribe, and told them to get a good night's rest, while he asked the orcs to point out the place from where they had fled in such a hurry. It turned out that there was a monster sleeping which amazed not only the chief, but also Yahello. This abomination was sleeping in a ball at the bottom of the canyon. Around it lay the remains of living creatures, which only a glance at which one could realize the nightmarish size of the Scolopendra. One head alone was the size of such large creatures. Water still had special abilities as well. Venomous crustacean fangs. With the blessings of forgotten
Even if the
Lizardmen teamed up with the orcs, this enemy would still be invincible to them. Sun Moon reasoned as he watched the test subjects. Rockrak watched the creature's crumpled movements. However, as time went on, they intensified. The scorpion began as if searching for prey. The ground shook, putting the tribe into panic. But it was just movement and sleep talking, said the orc, who had survived with it for days. Should they just run away? And how long would it even take to get around such a thing? The chief asked Stargazer. The old Lizardman replied that if they went back into the desert, again following the mountain, it would most likely take 8 days. Rockrak hesitated. He didn't know what to do. Looking at his tribe, he realized they were all afraid. Taking a detour was also a great solution, but it also had its nuances. Looking down from above, Sun Moon patiently watched the lizards, wanting to hear their decision. The tribe was extremely fortunate. Not only did they have a wise chief, but also an equally intelligent Jawal. She scrutinized the condition of the which seemed to have no flaws. It was so well positioned he would never get out. Fell into it. This place had its faults. At the top of the canyon were huge piles of rocks. Once rolled down. Yahello wasn't stupid, and quickly turned to the tribal chief. She was ready to fight Yahello, a level 3 warrior, strength 26, intelligence 35, social skills 28, and intuition 11 now. They had an advantage that no one had realized until now. Even the orcs who had been in this area didn't know about it. The Iron Master used the fastest method of raising the temperature of the metal. Would the chieftain remember that? Jell asked. Rockrak answered, and he was right. This special tool had its own name, bellows. They had the principle of a blacksmith's bellows. Thanks to this tool, more air and less force is required than before. If they used this tool, they could produce enormous power with little effort. But where was Yahello going with this? He asked. This device was created after the blacksmith had given it a lot of thought. To make it now would take quite a bit of time. However, they don't need such complicated tools in this case, replied Yahello. Simple bury the Scolopendra more than enough. Sleeping place. The hillside was high and uneven. At the foot of the slope, where the ancient Scolopendra wriggled, there was a steep slope at an angle that almost came to a perfect straight line. If Ray Crack and his warriors fought him there, they would not be able to move easily because of the steep slope, and would most likely come into direct contact with the ancient monster. On the other hand, the giant creature had very many legs, it would be able to climb up the even steeper slope. According to the plan, the chieftain was only supposed to approach the abomination when they were about to kill it. There were warriors standing near the boulders. Pointed out they were not with bare hands. They had found and uprooted several tall trees in the area, and each held one. The warriors shoved the logs under the boulders on the mountainside and then tilted them hard upward. But the boulders did not immediately budge. The rock at the edge of the mountain wobbled from side to side, chipping away pieces of rock little by little. With its enormous weight, Yahello, who was also struggling with everyone, ordered them not to give up and to work together. Her knowledge could be attributed to physics, the concepts of which they had not even heard of. Every time they finished turn, the whole tribe piled on a log together. Though the lizards had never encountered such leverage, they had managed to figure it out. Each time the stone swayed more, for now it stayed in place, watching the scolopendra quietly, unaware of what was happening overhead. Sun Warren waited for the next steps, rolling out rocks to kill the enemy. This one was a simple and effective idea. However, in order to catch monster of this level, one would need to roll all the stones at once. But was that possible in reality? Yahello commanded to use all their strength and roll all the stones even faster. It worked. The stones surged forward, rolling forward at a tremendous speed. Such a rumble woke the ancient creature, causing it to raise its head up. If the beast had been smart, it would have avoided the pile of rocks. However, the ancient monster rolling towards him as a challenge. Rather than a danger, he lunged at the first boulder, and it rolled down with great speed, then struck, hitting it precisely on its armored head. They did it, the Lizardmen tribe screamed, except they couldn't kill it. The ravaged centipede howled loudly as it straightened up to the enemy. With a multitude of legs, it scrambled up the steep slope. To kill attackers, they had to hurry and throw the rest of the rocks off the cliff at the frantic creature as quickly as possible. However, it was too late. Sun One got up from his seat and descended into Rockrak's body to control the situation. It was too early to lose in this game. Everyone's eyes rounded when the chief pushed everyone and pressed his full weight on the lever. The stone flew upward with all its might. 3 warriors couldn't do it at once, but he managed without listening to Yahello's without using the lever. Pushed the boulder beyond his own height. Every muscle in Rockrak's body tensed. Even the veins were visible. It seemed impossible at first, but with the power of a god, it was nothing. All they had to do was keep up with him and throw the stones together. Monster continued to shriek, all the while deafeningly shrieking. Before anyone knew it, the chief was rushing forward with his spear after the boulders. He threw it at the evil creature with lightning speed, hitting the concrete structure that protected its back. In terms of size, it wasn't that big of a wound, but it was enough to hold it back for a moment. A cry of pain covered the canyon when the spear pierced its vulnerable spot. However, it intensified a few seconds later when huge rocks piled on top as well. Its whiskers, jaws, and paws were broken off from the heavy splash from the damaged staining the sand. The last boulder crushing it to dust. A spectacular sight. Rockrack landed successfully on the ground, and Sun Wound returned to his satisfied with result. The hunt was a successful. The tribe had killed an ancient abomination. The whole tribe shouted about their victory over the monster. Faith in their god only grew. But in addition to that, something else important appeared. As a reward to Sun Wound, the game gave him a new item that from he wanted to get. A red orb engulfed in flames floated in Sun Wound's hand. It was the essence of the abomination. Its core, when it came to a god, its greatest power was its ability to create something. Just as Sun Wound was able to create enough food to feed the tribe, every god could create resources according to its realm. Using the faith points to create something that didn't exist in the world, God had to use equally rare resources. A creature created by a god could also evolve to a higher level, which would earn the title of an apostle. So it could also be used as a useful according to God's will. Apostles could even be used as generators of faith that spread the word of God through their existence. But is the creation in the original game Sun Wound wondered, what would it be like? He thought while twirling the sphere in his hands. The lizards looked at the dead body with of the curiosity. Yahello ripped off one of the monster's paws and thought that if it was monster meat, then maybe it could be used for food, though it had a peculiar smell. But it was worth a try. Spitting out after trying the ramen, she said, although the flavor was not good, it could be eaten. It seemed to be hard to eat. Like this, Yahello picked the fibers of the meat, analyzing its appearance. It might be difficult to eat raw food. It might be worth it to use other ingredients. The lizards could have picked an edible, fragrant herb and cooked it over a fire, as an attempt to mask or dispel strong, nasty smell opening the paw of an ancient monster. Yahello left the meat there and to give the food a pleasant flavor. She offered the first taste to the chief, who was impressed. The food was edible, but a little tasteless, which was logical, because Yahello was just learning to cook, as they had no such concept of cooking. Simply roasting meat was already an accomplishment. However, Yahello went further. Not only did she cook on fire, but she also added seasonings. The smell from the raw meat was so nasty that Rockrack even thought of throwing it all away. But cooking solved everything. The head of the settlement wanted to learn this skill as well. He didn't hesitate to take new food. Who was sitting next to him, so that she had seen that the leader of the orc had already had air. So she advised Rockrack to find a companion. Food fell from the poor lizard's hands, as his jaw dropped to the ground at such a state. But she continued to speak. The chief was getting old. So it was necessary to stabilize the tribe. You should find a mate, but since becoming chief, he had no time to even think about it. Brave Zhao offered herself in that role unless. Of course, he had someone else in mind, and responsible conversation. Rockrat was ready to somehow change the sun that was setting did it for him. Its direct rays shone directly on the beautiful jail. All behind you's back reflected the light. That interested everyone. In the ruins of the concrete that once stood, on the back of the Scolopendra, lay a golden plate. On it were carved like Egyptian hieroglyphics, with a heading from a drawing of herding and farming. It seemed to be some kind of rules. It didn't take long for Yor to start gnawing on this. Soft material to this. The stargazer said that this kind of metal was called gold. Jael had seen such a thing once. A metal master had once shown her the different kinds of metal.